What's up, YouTube? Tonight's video is the second chapter in my console collection series, and tonight we're going to focus on the Game Boy Advance. So while strictly not a console, it's actually a portable system, I felt this still qualified, and I have a decent collection that was worth highlighting in this video. The one thing to know about the Game Boy Advance is there were 3 distinct hardware variations on the system. And the original Game Boy Advance, I never purchased. I actually waited for the second revision before I took the leap and bought my own Game Boy Advance. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the hardware here for a moment, and then the main focus of this video will be on the games. Here we can see my Game Boy Advance SP, and like I said, this is the second revision of the hardware. This I purchased brand new in the year 2003 when these launched, and it represents quite a change from the original version of the Game Boy Advance. The original version just had a open-facing screen that was susceptible to scratches, and the second revision included this clamshell design, which protected the screen. So I thought it was a much more useful design, but I also liked that it was much easier to put in a pocket and take on the go, without having to worry about scratching the screen. So I wanted to show the original packaging here for a moment. There also is the third variation of the Game Boy Advance, and that is the Game Boy Micro. It was much smaller than even the SP, and made it the ultimate in go-anywhere size. The only problem with the Game Boy Micro is it lost the backwards compatibility that was a feature of the first 2 Game Boy Advance systems. If you have the original Game Boy Advance or the SP, it is capable of playing original Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, which I think is a very cool function of the unit. So you can choose whichever version of the Game Boy Advance that is your favorite. However, myself, I like the SP. I think it's my favorite of the 3. So I will show off my original SP, and you can see that after several years, it's got a few bangs and scratches, but overall it's in pretty good shape. It features 2 A and B button on the very front here, and then all the Game Boy Advance systems also have shoulder buttons. On the SP, they're very, very small, and I think that's probably my least favorite feature of the SP. The original Game Boy Advance had much larger trigger buttons. You have a select and start button here, and you also have the mono sound speaker right here in the center. Another flaw is that basically your hands, my thumb at least, will cover the speaker as I'm playing, so it kind of muffles the sound. It's not the best placement for it. You also have a button here that will turn on the backlight for the screen. And if you have been a classic gamer and played portable systems that came before this, you would know that a backlight is one of the best features that this system offered. The original Game Boy Advance did not have a backlight, and prior versions of the Game Boy did not either, so you had to have kind of clunky aftermarket lights to use with the systems. So another kind of first that came with this unit that was very notable. On the back you have your cartridge slot, and it's actually underneath where your games, or where your hands sit. So it's a little awkward sometimes if you're using an original Game Boy game and it stretches out beyond the unit here. But for the Game Boy Advance games, they fit flush with the top of the unit, and it's kind of a nice design. The other thing about the Game Boy Advance SP is it has a rechargeable battery only. There is no manual batteries as older versions of the Game Boy always had. So you need to use a very specific power supply to keep the unit charged. However, this was the first time that you had a portable system you didn't have to constantly put AA or AAA batteries in, which another thing was very innovative for its time. So overall, I would say the Game Boy Advance SP was a very successful design. The other thing I'll say about the Game Boy Advance series in general is this was really the last Nintendo system that wasn't gimmick-based. If you think about all the Nintendo systems that have come since then, they've all had some kind of gimmick in their play control or their design that really this was the last classic-style Nintendo system they offered. The other thing about the Game Boy Advance being a 16-bit system is it allowed you to play a lot of classic Super Nintendo games in very close to accurate format. Some of them were straight remakes or ports, and others offered enhanced remixes of those games. But definitely if you like the classic Super Nintendo and even the 8-bit Nintendo games, the Advance offers a lot of great ones to play. Alright, so I'm going to close up the system, and now we'll move on to the games in my collection. I also wanted to point out in the background here, we have 2 display boxes that I was able to pick up because I worked in a game retail store when the Game Boy Advance launched. So both of these were early games for the Game Boy Advance, and Konami provided these extra large display boxes, which I've hung on to after all these years, and I think they're pretty cool. Alright, so moving on to the games. With the Game Boy Advance, I prefer to have all of my games in the original boxes. I think they look so much better than just having loose carts. I do have a few loose cartridges in my collection, and I'll go over those kind of at the end of the video. The other thing that's really nice about the Game Boy Advance SP, or any of the Game Boy Advances, is they are not region locked, so you can play import games on these extremely easily. I do have some import games in my collection, and I'll make sure to go over those with you as well. So the first game I have in my collection is Gunstar Superheroes, and this was a unique sequel to the classic Gunstar Heroes on the Sega Genesis that was released for the Game Boy Advance and no other system. And it's very cool. I mean, just a classic run and gun, shoot 'em up, and quite good actually. Don't like it as much as the original, but for a portable system, it's quite good. Next I have 2 games in Nintendo's RPG series that started on the Game Boy Advance, and that is Golden Sun and Golden Sun: The Lost Age. Haven't put a whole lot of time into either of these, but they do get very good reviews. I remember when the original Golden Sun came out, I mean, that was considered to be pretty much the best RPG you could buy on the system. So a lot of people are big fans of both of these, and hopefully I'll give these a try someday. The next one is Drill Dozer, and this is a game that populated clearance bins for a long time after it launched. And I think Nintendo, it is a first-party game, it's a Nintendo game, it was actually designed by Game Freak, better known as the creators of Pokemon. But I think Nintendo expected this game to sell a lot better than it really did, and it is a very unique, innovative game. It has a built-in rumble pack in the cartridge, and I like this game, but I don't think it really caught on to the level they expected. You would know that because they never released a sequel, and if anything, Nintendo loves to release sequels, anything they can make money on. So it's very telling that this was kind of a one-and-done release. The next game is one of my favorites on the Game Boy Advance, and that is Double Dragon Advance. This is not a straight port of the original Double Dragon arcade or NES game, but a completely new remixed game with all the classic gameplay. It was published by Atlas in the US, and it was designed by essentially what became of the remnants of the Japanese developer Technos, who designed the original Double Dragon series game and several other cool games. But they formed a new company, I believe it was called Million, and released a few kind of remixes of some of the classics, such as this one. If you have a Game Boy Advance, or you're planning on getting one, this should be one of the first games you get. I really love this game. Probably one of my all-time favorite Double Dragons overall. So next is Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance. There were 3 Castlevania games released for the Game Boy Advance. You can see the first one back here in the background, Circle of the Moon, and then the third one was Aria of Sorrow. Unfortunately, this is the only one I've ever picked up, but I think they're all very similar and they're all about equally good. They are the Metroidvania-style Castlevania games, so I'm more fond of the classic Castlevania games. I don't really like that style as well, however, they look beautiful and definitely well-designed games for the Game Boy Advance. So, generally being a big Castlevania fan, I would like to get those other 2 at some point, but this is a good one to start with. This was the second of the 3. The next game is Bubble Bobble Old and New, and if you know anything about me, you know that Bubble Bobble is one of my all-time favorite games. However, the new game included on this is not that hot. Taito did not develop the new version of the game that's included on this. It was developed by Ultron, I believe, in Japan, and it's pretty watered down. However, the original Bubble Bobble is included with this, and it is a very solid port of that. So if you just want some good Bubble Bobble on your Game Boy Advance, this is a good way to go. It's also very important to know that the Bobble on the original Game Boy is very lacking. There's a lot of scrolling in the screen, so this is a much improved version of that if you ever want to play that game on a portable system. Next is Boulder EX, and this is a refreshed version of a classic puzzle game. I do like it, and it also includes the original version as well. Kind of simplistic fun. It's not going to set you back a lot of money, and worth a play if you can pick this up cheap. I mentioned Gunstar Superheroes momentarily ago, and this is another Treasure franchise that was given a exclusive sequel for the Game Boy Advance, and that is Guardian Heroes Advance. Guardian Heroes was originally released on the Sega Saturn, and this is a refreshed new game in that series. Again, kind of with Gunstar Superheroes, it's not as good as the original. However, for a portable system, it's a solid action game and worth picking up. The next game is one of the more expensive Game Boy Advance games, and I was very fortunate to pick this up brand new, so I've been holding on to this tightly as I've seen it climb in value. However, another of my very favorite franchises, and that is Pocky and Rocky, and this is the exclusive Game Boy Advance sequel. Could be considered, depending on how you count the series, either the third or fourth game in the series, and it is Pocky and Rocky with Becky. So there is a third character added in the game. It's not the best of the series by any means, but again, I'll give the disclaimer as a portable action game, it's good stuff. Obviously, if you can't take the Super Nintendo versions on the go, this is the next best thing. So, very neat game, and I'm glad it exists. I wish Natsume had made more of these so more people could play this game, but they are kind of notorious for their low print runs, and luckily I was able to capitalize that on when this game was new. So, pick this up ever if you can find it, because it's good stuff. The next game is another of my favorite franchises, and that is Mr. Driller 2. This is a kind of watered-down port of the arcade sequel to the original Mr. Driller. It didn't get as many home releases as the original Mr. Driller, so it's not really much to compare to. However, I do own the actual arcade board of this game, and I'd much rather play that than this portable version. But Mr. Driller is pretty much always good wherever you go, so not a horrible game. Just again, keep it cheap. If you can pick it up cheap, it's worth getting. This next game is also probably the most expensive game in my Game Boy Advance library, and another one I'm very happy to have picked up a long time ago, soon after it came out. That is, of course, Ninja 5-0. And again, this game is worth the money that it goes for. It's fantastic. It's basically a mix of, I don't know, I've heard it's a mix of like elevator action, Shinobi, and maybe a Contra game even, or Strider, I guess would be the other one. It's ninja action with emphasis on action, less on stealth or anything like that. And a lot of grappling and swinging and things like that. You can fly, jump walls, things like that. Very, very, very cool action game. Unfortunately, they did not make many of these, and I don't know why. This game should have caught on much bigger. It is known as Ninja Cop in Europe, and I believe it's also Ninja Cop in Japan, but I'm not positive about that. The other thing about this game is you have to be very careful when buying these, especially even back when this game was near new. There are a lot of bootleg copies out of there, and this original one I picked up unfortunately turned out to be a bootleg. I confirmed that by looking at the manual, and once you opened it up, it had all the inner pages, however all the text was just complete gibberish, so easy way to identify if it's a fake or not. This is definitely a genuine copy, and definitely an essential piece of the Game Boy Advance library. It's a great game. Next is another RPG I have not played a whole lot of, and that is Lunar Legend. I do like the other Lunar series games, so I would hope that this is pretty good. But picked this up somewhat recently and just haven't really had any time for it, but it looks great judging by the box art. Another RPG I picked up recently is Luffy, The Ruins of Lore. Can't say enough about this series. I really like it, and another game I haven't put a lot of time into, but Taito did a great job creating the original Lufia games, and many of these sequels are also good quality. Lufia has actually had a lot of exclusive sequels on portable Nintendo systems. There is a Lufia for Game Boy Color, this one on Game Boy Advance, and then there's also one on the DS that I don't have yet. So all those are usually pretty solid picks to pick up. This next one is Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, so it's a port of the Super Nintendo Classic, but it also has the Four Swords adventure included with it too, which is kind of a new side quest on the series. It also links up with Four Swords on the GameCube, and I haven't done that yet, but it is another option that this game offers you, and I think it's kind of cool. So, Link to the Past, enough has been said about that game, but it is obviously a classic, and welcome on the Game Boy Advance. I do like shooters, one of my favorite genres of games, and this is another of the exclusives on the Game Boy Advance. This is Yridian II. There is an original Yridian also, but this one is a little bit different style. And if you want to see your Game Boy Advance pushed to the max on graphics, this game looks fantastic. So I can recommend this. I think it's a pretty cool one, and one you don't see too often. This next game I just got very recently, and this is Super Ghouls and Ghosts, which is a Capcom classic from the Super Nintendo. I believe they gave this game a light remix for the Game Boy Advance. I haven't really tried all the new features with this, but it does look quite good based on just a quick playthrough, so definitely another welcome game for the Game Boy Advance. However, nothing really unique that you couldn't get on another system. One of the other things that Nintendo came up with the Game Boy Advance was the classic NES series of games. And this was pretty much one of their ultimate cash-in moves. I would equate this on nearly the level of evil as the Amiibos. So what they did was they brought a bunch of NES classic games straight port with no extra features to the Game Boy Advance, which sounded fantastic. However, they didn't exactly use the cartridge storage capacity to its max, and they released every single one of these as separate games. Yeah, I consider this completely evil. So I only am willing to support these by purchasing them used at very discounted rates. Yeah, these were slightly less as new games than the typical Game Boy Advance game, but come on, that's just ridiculous to give you one game for your, whatever it was, $20, I think these were. So I can't complain too much. These are obviously great games. Certainly classics from the NES. None of them are really the newer stuff from the NES. They're more like early NES games. So like this one is Castlevania 1, but 2 and 3 did not come out as part of this series. So I do have a couple of these, but not something I'm going to chase down all of them. I think there was 20 or 18, something like that, in the series as a whole. There were a couple Famicom exclusives that came out on the Japanese Game Boy Advance that we didn't get in the US as well. So the other two of those I have are both the Zelda games from the NES, so Zelda 1 and Zelda 2. But yeah, that's all I'm going to say about those because, like I said, these are complete cash-in ripoff. Alright, next game I got is a exclusive to this series for the Game Boy Advance, and that is Metal Slug Advance. It's kind of a port of the original Metal Slug arcade game, but it is enhanced quite a bit for the Game Boy Advance with just some cool little extras. I do like this. It actually looks very good on the Game Boy Advance and keeps up the pace pretty cool. So if you've played all the Metal Slug games on the Neo Geo Pocket Color, then this is the next step up from there. This next one is a shooter, and it's considered very poor. I haven't even opened this one from the shrink wrap, but that is Strike Force Hydra. It's one you can pick up very cheap. This was another cheap game I picked up, and it's Pinball Tycoon. Probably isn't that good, even though I do like pinball games like this, but I haven't really played it yet. Next one is another RPG, and one of the more obscure ones, I believe, for the Game Boy Advance, and that is Aseema The Enemy. Got this basically because it's a Natsume game, and their games have really cool artwork and obviously low print runs, so worth picking this up if you ever see it around. I don't know how good it is yet because I haven't tried it out. A few more games in my US collection. I have WarioWare Twisted. This was a game with a gimmick. It had a motion sensor built into the cartridge, and if you can see in this little reflection here, I don't know how well that shows up, but you actually twist your Game Boy Advance side to side to advance Wario through the mini games, or micro games they actually are. Very cool game, but gets a little old after a while just because the gimmick pretty much plays the same for all the micro games. But this series is neat, and this was, I think, maybe only the second one in that series. The Wario microgame series actually started with this game, and this is the original WarioWare Incorporated Mega Microgames. I put a ton of time into this game when I got it, and I really got hooked on it. This one doesn't have any kind of gimmicky sensors or anything like that. It's just straightforward action, and you can pick up these games anywhere you are and play them very shortly. They last, whatever, 10 to 15 seconds a piece. And very, very fun, very addictive. Some nice nods to Nintendo history, and also doesn't take itself too seriously. So definitely a welcome member of the Game Boy Advance library. This game was actually an exclusive release to Target stores, and it is Sonic Pinball Party. I wanted this game because I am a Sega fan, and I noticed it had Amigo. I'm a really big Samba de Amigo fan. It has themed pinball tables based on some of Sega's franchises. Not really a great game, but I guess worth having if you're a Sega fanboy. That's the best way I can put it. It's not something you're going to play a whole lot. There also was a House of the Dead pinball called Pinball of the Dead. I believe it's the same game engine that this has, and it came out before this one, but I never picked that one up. This next one is another of the classic franchises remixed for the Game Boy Advance, and that is River City Ransom EX. This series I do like. I especially like it on the NES, of course, but the Game Boy Advance version is, it's okay. It's definitely not the same quality of remix as the Double Dragon one is, but it's worth playing if you really like River City Ransom. The other thing I'll say about it is the Double Dragon remix had great cover art by Atlas. This one has this whatever is going on cover. It's incredibly cheap artwork and unfortunate, not their normal quality. So the same team of developers also created this remake. I believe their name is, again, Million. And it's worth a play if you can pick this up. This next one is the last of my boxed US games, and that is Popeye Rush for Spinach. I picked this one up very cheaply, and it's actually still shrink wrapped, so I haven't even tried it out, but it looks like a decent enough action game. So next we'll move on to some import games. So the first one of these is another kind of unique one that Nintendo came up with. This is one of their other unique ideas. They came up with some very, very simplistic Atari 2600 grade new games that they put out in a series in Japan only. And this is considered to be one of the best of those, and it's called Dot Stream. I really enjoyed it. It is incredibly simple. However, it's also very addicting. I think there was 6 or 8 of these total, and they came even in a unique packaging that the other Japanese games didn't have. The series is called the Bit Generation series, and you can see the marking for that on the top of the box. But they came in these small square cases, and I thought they were very unique. This is much smaller than a typical US GBA box, so very cool series. You know, some of the games are not really considered that great, but a few of those are definitely worth getting. I'd like to pick up a few more of them. This next one is a exclusive to the Japanese Game Boy Advance. This did not come out in the US, and that is Tower and Shaft Advance. This was originally an arcade game, and this is the only home version of it you can get. I really enjoy this, though. It's super fun. It has essentially 2 separate games in one. One of them, you are to get your Indiana Jones-like character to the top of the tower, and then the other one is to get him to the bottom of the shaft. Basically, they both control with a very simple control scheme with using only one button, and you just need to navigate them throughout obstacles to make sure that you don't get crushed or you don't run out of time. Fun stuff, and kind of a shame this didn't come out in the US, but if you want to pick up a cool import game, this one is one I can highly recommend. Some of you may be familiar with a current Nintendo franchise called Rhythm Heaven, and it basically is another simple microgames type collection, but they are very music based. I have played some of the newer games in that series, and I think they're pretty good. However, this is where it all started, and this game is Japanese exclusive. This is called Rhythm Tengoku, which is Rhythm Heaven, of course. But this one, for some reason, the care and attention brought into the games was the best, and really gets the music rhythm part of the game tied into what you're doing if you're going to succeed at this. So you have to play these games repeatedly until you can really figure out exactly how the rhythm goes. If you're good at music action games, I think you'll really enjoy this game. And again, does not take itself too seriously. The games are incredibly wacky, and you will have a great time if you pick this game up. Highly recommend this one. I mentioned Mr. Driller 2 earlier. This is another Mr. Driller game that we did not get in the US. This is Mr. Driller A, and it is related to the arcade game Mr. Driller G, which is very cool. This one, they actually tried to add some RPG elements into it, so it has some reason to progress other than just getting to the next level of the stage. And you can gain experience and buy things and stuff like that. So this one's a pretty cool entry in the series, and again, kind of a shame we didn't get this one here. This last one is a Kirby game, and unfortunately I can't remember the official title of this one. This is one we did get a US release of. I just happened to pick up the import because I thought the box was cool with this sparkly art, if you guys can see that. So I do like Kirby games. They are always a good time, especially the classic 2D style ones like this. And portable systems like the Game Boy Advance are always a welcome home for Kirby games. So definitely a cool pickup here. Alright, so that is all of my boxed games for the Game Boy Advance, both US and import. I do have a few loose games, which I'll show off real quickly. I try to get all my Game Boy Advance games in boxes, but sometimes they're difficult because of the cardboard. Many people threw them out, unfortunately, when they purchased them. So some of these I picked up just because they were cheap, but they're kind of placeholders, at least until I can get a complete copy. So going into those, I have a few more shooters. I have Gradius Galaxies. This one is an import game. This is Klonoa 2. This did get a US release, and I'd like to pick that up if I can find the US one, but definitely a great game. If you play the Klonoa games that are kind of a 2.5D, the Game Boy Advance ones are just strictly 2D, and it holds up just as well. They're very fun to play. Next one is another shooter, and that is Phalanx. This is a port, I believe, of the Super Nintendo game. I don't think they really enhanced it too much, but that is one of my favorite shooters on the Super Nintendo, and so I can highly recommend this. The next one's another unusual Natsume game. This is Car Battler Joe. It's a strange, like, junkyard RPG, I guess would be the way to describe it. Definitely a unique title, and I'd like to have this one complete. Another Natsume game is Metabots, the Metabee edition. This is quite rare for some reason. Not really a Metabots fan, but I picked it up just because it was cheap. Next one is the original Fire Emblem that we got in the US. This series has been around a lot longer in Japan, but this is where we started getting Fire Emblem games, and those are very popular today. So this one, kind of Nintendo was testing the waters with this one, but today you can find Fire Emblem games much more easily. And finally is Boktai, which is another unique Game Boy Advance game because it has a sun sensor in it, which you can see, maybe you can see it. Where's it at? It's that little black square on the back. But yeah, this game reacts differently to when you play it, be it daytime or nighttime, and the sun sensor is how it can tell what game actions to produce based on what time of day it is, which is very innovative. There was a sequel to this also on the Game Boy Advance, and these were Hideo Kojima games, so definitely cool games that kind of flew under the radar. So that pretty much does it for my collection of the Game Boy Advance. Hopefully you guys enjoyed seeing what all I have. If you guys are fans of the Game Boy Advance, please make suggestions in the comment box. Let me know what other games I should pick up for my collection. I do have a few others on my list, but I'm always looking for recommendations as well. Please take a moment, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think about the video. And hopefully I'll be able to make more of my classic console collection series for you very soon. For now, have a great day or night wherever you are, and I'll talk to you soon.